Hey Liv, welcome back to my first rodeo.
Yeah, hey, how's it going? I'm Liv.
And I am Mike. This is my first rodeo, the show that interviews really cool people and asks the question, what's so bad about your first rodeo? Metaphorically, we're asking about the first in their path to success, or many firsts in the case of a lot of our guests. And our guest today is no exception. Nancy Hollander is a very well-known figure in the legal and due process communities. She's represented some very, very interesting people, some for the things they're accused of, some for the things that they did, and some for things that they didn't do. She is a really interesting woman who I've gotten to know over the years. Lives in New York now, used to live in New Mexico, but represented people all over the world, including Mohamedou al-Salahi, who was a wrongfully detained for 14 years in Guantanamo Bay, person sort of caught up in September 11th aftermath. And he wrote a fascinating book while he was in Guantanamo Bay called The Guantanamo Bay Diary. It was turned into a movie, and another one of our guests, played by a really cool person, Jodie Foster, played Nancy Hollander. How about that?
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
And, of course, Nancy Hollander also represented Chelsea Manning, who was not only accused of things but did things. So we can have a discussion with her about due process and representing people that are accused of or did really bad things.
Yeah, sounds great.
So that'll be today. But heck, what you been up to?
Just enjoying the weather. It's been nice here, and just watching some TV. I have some weddings coming up.
Weddings. Oh, you're in that season, yeah.
It is wedding season, isn't it?
No, for me it's divorce season. I gotta be honest. We're in different stages of life.
Well,
I'm in the death divorce phase of life.
It's probably divorce season for a lot of people because it's post Valentine's Day.
Yeah, you had told me when I had inauspiciously become single again, that you'd be my wing person, but it was going to take till after Valentine's Day because that's when people break up.
Yeah, because it was during Christmas, and I said no one breaks up during Christmas because they want to not explain it to their family.
I see.
And then they normally either after that they'll break up or they string along till Valentine's Day. So it probably is divorce season, but it's also wedding season.
Yeah. So fa la la, what does that mean to you? I know you just got married a year ago, so it's not that far off for you.
Yeah, I really miss getting gifts, and it's when I see stuff now, I wish I could put it back on my registry, but no one's buying me anything anymore. So it's kind of sad that it's over. But speaking of registries,
right.
So when you got married back in the day,
which time?
any of them, like. Did you keep, I kept an Excel chart of what everybody got me and their names, so I know if you didn't get me anything. I know if you got me something that was like $10 versus like a really nice gift. And obviously I was very thankful for all my gifts, and if you got me nothing
sounds like it,
and showed up, I was still very thankful.
Right.
But now that some of my friends that came to my wedding are getting married, I look back on the Excel chart and I'm like, what do you do? Do you buy an equal gift? Do you buy less if they didn't get you anything? Do you not, what do you do?
Right, and do you adjust for, like time value and the, consumer price index?
Exactly.
What do you do? I mean, I'll tell you my thinking, but what do you do?
So for a person who didn't get me anything, I got them a very expensive gift.
I gotta go back. Who doesn't get you anything?
A lot of people didn't get me anything.
Okay, and then you do what now?
I buy them. Well, one person didn't get me a gift that got married, and I didn't get them anything. So I was like, whatever, I'm never going to talk to you again.
Okay.
But my other friend didn't get me anything, and she's getting married, and I got her a very expensive gift just to be like...
Rubber face in it?
Not rubber face in it, but maybe she'll be like, oh, that was so nice. What did I get you? And I'll be like, nothing.
Oh, that is a nice moment, I suppose.
Yeah, but yeah. I always try to get something $100 or more, just because if it's two people, I feel like $50 a person is fair.
This whole spreadsheet thing worries me because I'm sure I've given great gifts. I've given late gifts. I don't know that I've ever given no gift on purpose. Maybe like when a client of mine invites me to their daughter's wedding, and I don't know. I mean, I would intend to give a gift, but if it's a last minute thing, So I don't know. The fact that somebody's carrying around a spreadsheet that records what I've given or not given, that worries me.
Yeah. I
Do
don't
other people do that, or is that just you?
I've a lot of my friends that have gotten married, they also do spreadsheets,
Mm,
or they just kind of know
right.
in the back of their mind who didn't get them
Uh
something,
huh.
and that just sticks with you.
Okay. So yeah, spreadsheets. That is worrisome. Do you correlate the gift to the grandeur of the wedding, and frankly, how much they're spending on a dinner for you, or other
Yeah.
accoutrements of the
Yeah,
festivities?
I think so. I mean, I think it doesn't really matter the cost of the wedding. Like if you're getting married in a community center versus like the Biltmore estate, you should
Right.
still buy that person a good gift because it's their hopefully one time getting married, and
Right.
so you only have to get them one gift.
Yeah. So you don't correlate to how much you're spending on your dinner.
Well, a lot of times you're not going to know.
Well, if you're going to, the Biltmore, or something really nice,
Yeah.
and they're asking you, do you want fillet or lobster and whatever,
Yeah,
you're like, they're dropping $200 on the
exactly.
meal.
Yeah, and
There's
I
there's
think
some money being spent. Do you have to spend at least that much on a gift?
I would say yeah. I think it's only fair.
Yeah, I guess except the
Well,
parents are spending
it
on the
also
wedding
it
sometimes.
also depends like how often you talk to this person. Like if you want to keep them in your good grace and continue
Uh,
relationships, then put out more. But if you really could care less, then put out
yeah,
less.
I don't know if manipulative is the word. It just feels so
Calculated.
contrived, calculated. Yeah,
It is.
and
I think it is calculating. It's like when it's the same thing as when you buy someone a Christmas gift for your coworkers. Some of them they're gonna
yeah.
be really nice, and some people are gonna get a coffee cup.
Yeah, that's tough. I've been going to gift cards for weddings, to be honest.
I like that, and I like just cash gifts or giving money to a honeymoon.
Right.
But I don't know. I always like to try to buy people like a Waterford item,
Hmm.
just something like that they'll have for the rest of their life.
Yeah, there was I mean, I tried to be thoughtful slash impactful slash a little bit selfish in this way. Like, there was this couple that was getting married, and they were friends with one of my daughters, and they were very minimalistic people. They lived in a Zen Buddhist monastery, and for their honeymoon, they were going to spend basically, and they did spend 6 months basically walking across the world. And so they had a bunch of things that they wanted,
Hmm.
and I looked at the list, and one of the items was walking sticks. Now,
Hmm.
those are very useful and practical,
Hmm.
not terribly expensive.
Hmm.
And I was thinking every day they're going to get up and they're going to pick up those walking sticks and they're going to think of me.
Yeah, and they probably do.
Yeah, they thank me for them all the time.
Yeah.
So that was a bit selfish, but I certainly do that with client gifts. You
I-
try to think of something
yeah.
that the client, like a bottle of wine sucks because you're going to drink it and it's
Hmm.
gone.
Yeah.
So I'd go like, I don't know, the equivalent of paperweights or something
Uh-huh.
significant that they're going to think of me every
That they
time.
have to see you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. I hope anyway.
Yeah.
So yeah, but divorces you don't really give gifts. Maybe a bottle of liquor, commiserate, get some therapy sessions.
Yeah.
That's it. You offer to be the wingman for somebody, and then you never follow through. Live.
I didn't have to. I did. I tried to hook you up with a lady. She was like
She was 70 or 90 or something like that, wasn't
she
she?
was like 74
Yeah,
and she is still killing
I'm sure she's lovely.
it.
But I just yeah,
she's
that's
a fun lady.
right. That's cool.
I've hung out with her on Friday nights.
Right. That's cool. Yeah, you didn't actually try to hook me up with her. You just suggested you
No.
might.
And you can't be ageist. I mean, she could be she's like a wild cougar.
That's true. And if I was 70, I'd probably be looking to get hooked up with a 50 something.
Yeah.
So it just doesn't necessarily work the other way.
Yeah.
Or is she going out with young guys?
Um, you know,
I say younger.
yeah, I think younger, meaning like 60s.
Oh, I got you. Yeah, I'd be
Yeah.
robbing the cradle then, I suppose.
Yeah.
Well, not necessary right now, anyway.
No.
So, you looking forward to talking to Nancy?
I am. I'm just like I was just having thoughts in my head about prisoners and gifts and prison pen pals and stuff.
Oh,
But we can talk about that after.
okay. Could even talk about that with Nancy if you want. She
I
she
could.
visited Guantanamo Bay on many
Yeah.
occasions.
Mhm.
Visited Mohamedou Al Salahi, and they've, in addition to having the movie made about them, have had many opportunities to speak. I've actually spoken with the two of them before in connection with some work I did at the American Bar Association,
Mhm.
and it's fascinating stuff. So, shall we get to it?
Let's get to it.
Let's get.
My first rodeo. My first rodeo. My first rodeo.
So I'm so excited to welcome to our show Nancy Hollander, who I've met many times and interviewed her once before for some work I did with the American Bar Association. She is one of the most fascinating people you'll ever meet. Another guest who's played in a Hollywood blockbuster by a Hollywood blockbusting star, Jodie Foster, played her in a movie that portrayed a lot of her story and a lot of Mohamedou al-Slahi's story, which is a derivative of the Guantanamo Diary, a book that he wrote while he was wrongfully detained for, Nancy will correct me, but right around 14 years, most of it in Guantanamo Bay. Fascinating story there. Nancy has represented some very high profile people and sometimes not high profile per se, but really important cases dealing with due process and transparency. She represented Chelsea Manning, who was convicted of sharing confidential information with WikiLeaks and otherwise. Welcome to the show, Nancy Hollander.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
And you're such a. I met you first before I think I even knew of you and your connection to all these important cases and arguing in the U.S. Supreme Court and otherwise. You're such a humble person and just such a good grandmother and mother and just a nice person to hang out with. And yet you've handled all of these huge cases. And, the common thread through all of them, at least as I think about it, is really due process and transparency. And that, I see you as a person that really appreciates our federal court and our Constitution, and someone who tries to uphold it and hold our government to the standards that at least you perceive, it embodies. Is that a fair characterization of your career?
That is fair. That is completely fair. Being a criminal defense lawyer means supporting the Constitution, upholding the Constitution, and due process, the right to counsel and the right to a fair trial. The rule of law is the overarching part of that, the rule of law.
Well, we're thrilled to have you on our show, which, as I told you, sort of asks about the metaphoric first rodeos, the firsts in careers, and in your case, really, really successful careers. There's so many things you've done, and each of them have a first. It's hard to know where to begin, but how about we begin with maybe one of your first arguments in the U.S. Supreme Court? What is that like, and what did you learn from that experience?
Well, first of all, I've only done it once. I don't ever intend to go back. I have a perfect record. I won 8-0. There were only 8 justices ruling on the case. So with that record, I'm not going back to give it another chance. It's kind of like when you ask a question in cross-examination and you think, wow, that was such a good question. I think I'll ask it again. And the second time you don't get it. So I don't plan to go back. It was an amazing experience, Mike. I was fortunate in that I was able to prepare and do nothing but prepare for it for an entire month. I had 5 really important moots. What's his name? Starr. What was his first name? Ken Starr. Yes, he was one of the people who mooted me. And was one of the most important because it was one of the first moots in law school in California. And I was making the argument and he said, don't be afraid. You won this case below. Tell them what they should do. Tell them. And I completely changed my argument as a result of that and became more forceful in telling the court, we won below, we won everywhere, and it's because we're right. And fortunately, they agreed.
And what case was that, Nancy?
That was it's a case we refer to as the UDV, União de Vegetal. It's a case of religious freedom. It was under the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, and it is a religious organization that drinks a tea, that's their sacrament, and the tea is called in Spanish ayahuasca, which is how most people know it. In Portuguese, huasca, And it's made from the bark of one tree and the leaves of another in the Amazon. And it's not a hallucinogenic, but that's really a misnomer. But the reason it's significant is that it contains a naturally occurring version of dimethyltryptamine, DMT, which is a Schedule I drug, which means on that schedule it has no use and can't be used for anything. So that's why the US government got involved. But as the court ruled correctly, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act goes on top of all the other statutes in America and provides for religious freedom. And Justice Roberts wrote the opinion, and it's a beautiful opinion that he wrote.
Did you ever get to try the tea?
Yes, I did in Brazil.
What is it like when you drink it?
Well, first of all, about half the people who drink it throw up. And of course,
And Liv's familiar with that, by the way. She's a big drinker.
I am not a big drinker. He's kidding. I'm a big drinker of tea, though.
Well, this tea tastes terrible, number one. And then it was a weird experience because I knew that what I was seeing was what I was thinking about. But I was seeing it and thought, oh, I didn't realize I was thinking about her, or I was thinking about the ocean, or whatever I was thinking about. And then they'd change the music and I would start thinking about other things, but only with my eyes closed. As soon as I opened my eyes, everything was normal again. And after the 4 hours, it was over. Although we went home and I was still kind of feeling it. And I thought, okay, I really want to go to sleep, but if I close my eyes, I'm kind of back in there and it's completely pitch dark here. So maybe I could go to sleep with my eyes open. And then I realized that was really stupid. And then I went to sleep. And I went to another session, 2 other sessions where I didn't drink the tea and just observed, but it was a fabulous event all the way around.
And am I remembering right that case emanated from a Native American group that was one of their traditions? No?
No, that you're thinking of the Native American church, and their sacrament is peyote, mescaline, that is found in peyote and in other cacti. But this is a Brazilian religious group.
So did, since that case or under the Religious Freedom Act, are other groups like the Native Americans able to take advantage of that ruling?
Yes, some. The Native American church had a separate exemption carved out of the law in 1965 or 68, I forget when the drug law came into effect, but they were carved out initially. So they didn't have any issue, but there have been some other organizations, a few that have taken advantage of it. It's difficult to do. And it's now more difficult because it now requires an administrative hearing, which makes it more difficult.
Oh, very interesting. So another fascinating first, it seems to me, and of course some of this is portrayed, at least in Hollywood fashion, in the movie, but you made many trips to Guantanamo Bay, not just for Mohamedou, but for at least one other client that I'm aware of, and maybe others beyond that. Tell us about your first trip to Guantanamo Bay and things that our listeners may not know about it.
Well, my first trip was in 2005 to visit Mohamedou al-Salahi. I knew nothing about him, literally nothing, except that there were suggestions from the government, accusations that he had recruited people who were involved in 9/11. And I knew he was Mauritanian. Mauritania is a country in West Africa that speaks Arabic, but was a French colony. And so we assumed he spoke French. I went with another lawyer, Sylvia Reese, who was in the case at first, later dropped out, but she was in it then. And I wanted her to stay in it because I didn't know if he spoke English. And we hoped he spoke French. We didn't bring an interpreter with us. And we met in Fort Lauderdale, Sylvia and I. we got on this little plane, little tiny airplane where they lined you up and said, you're going to sit in this seat and you in this seat and you in this seat. So they got the weight even. And before we took off, they said, this is 3.5 hours and there are no restrooms. So the guy leaned over the bench, inside and said, there's the men's and there's the women's. I suggest you all go now. And everybody did at that point. And then we got on. These planes were so old. It was Air Sunshine. It got decommissioned later. A couple of the planes fell into the ocean. But it was really, really old and kind of dirty. But we got there. You see, the American flights can't fly over Cuban airspace. So they have to go all the way around to the Bahamas. And that's why it's 3.5 hours from Florida. It should be 90 minutes. But you go all the way around and then come up north to Guantanamo Bay. And we stayed at that time in a hotel sort of thing. It was a combined bachelor quarters. It got better later. But at that time, you shared a room, and then there was a bathroom and a little kitchen area and 2 other people on the other side. And we got on the bus in the morning and went to the ferry, and then took the 20-minute ride on the ferry across Guantanamo Bay to the other side. The side we were on was the leeward side, also was known as the lonely side because there was nothing there. The other side was where everything is. There's a hospital and schools and the subway and an Irish pub and, a big Next, which is like a giant Walmart where everything's 20% cheaper. And we got there and we went to the McDonald's and we were told we could bring something to our clients. And we had breakfast and I think brought something. I don't remember what we brought the first time. But then we went to the badging office and got our pictures taken and got badged. And then we went in. And Sylvia and I had no idea what to expect. And this part is, it's in the movie pretty accurately. We walk into this hut and there's a table, and sitting on the other side is Mohamedou. And he stands up, but he doesn't move. And he puts his arms out. I don't know if you can see, but he puts his arms out. But he didn't move. And we didn't realize at first that he was shackled to the ground literally with an eye bolt around his ankle. And we walked up and he hugged us and said, "My lawyers." And, there was no issue of that we were women. He's a religious Muslim man, or no issues at all. And that's how we met. That was my first visit.
Wow, and obviously, different time and obviously a different perception of him, not just by you, but of the people that were detaining him. Obviously, different views of torture and due process, and a lot of those are because of the passage of time. A lot of them because of the hard work that you and other lawyers did. But at that moment, in that time, I'm guessing that the people that had an obligation to let you have access to your client weren't really big fans of yours. Is that a fair perception on my part?
Yeah, they weren't. The guards were fine. The interrogators weren't fans of ours at all. I remember, though, that the chief JAG officer came in and brought us some papers the very first time. And he said, your client is the most respectful here. He never throws anything or disrespects anyone. But he had also been tortured for a year at that point, and he was pretty subdued and afraid. He was always afraid there, but he was really afraid at that time because the torture time had just ended several months before that.
Mm.
So as a criminal attorney, you've probably been to a ton of prisons and jails before that experience. What would you say is like the biggest difference between a regular state prison or a federal prison versus Guantanamo Bay?
The biggest difference to me is that when you go to visit a client, and I've been to prisons all over the US, in London and Warsaw, you go in, you see your client for an hour or two. You focus on the case. You make sure your client, or at least I would make sure my client's okay. Do you need anything? Are you being treated okay, et cetera? And then you're gone. And in Guantanamo, you're there for 2 or 3 days. I mean, that plane lands on Monday, and you might or might not get in to see your client on Monday, depending on what time the plane gets there. And then you have Tuesday and Wednesday and maybe Thursday, because the planes usually don't leave till Friday. And it's not like you can say, well, I'm finished now, I'll just take the next plane, because there is no next plane. You'll take the plane back on Friday. So I spent many, many hours with Mohamedou over the course of these years, many hours. And we talked about everything, not just his case. I got to know him. I got to know his family. I got to know what he was thinking about. We ate lunch together. That to me is one big difference. The second big difference is they don't have any other visitors. It's not like the family can ever come. Nobody else is ever there except the lawyers.
And Mohammed, and he was there, remind me and remind our listeners, how many years was he in Guantanamo Bay?
Well, he was picked up in Mauritania in November of 2001, taken to Jordan for 8 months, then to Afghanistan for a couple of months, and arrived in Guantanamo in August of 2002. And he got out in October of 2016.
Wow. And he was there till 2016, notwithstanding the fact that there were no charges brought against him. And in fact, you actually succeeded in proving that there was no basis to hold him several years before 2016, and he remained.
That's correct. There were never any charges. And we filed a petition for a writ of habeas corpus, as did most of the lawyers, just about everybody. That was heard in the federal district court in Washington, Judge Robertson, and he granted it. And he said Mohamedou should be immediately released because the government couldn't prove that it had a reason to detain him. And for those of you who aren't lawyers, this is not proof beyond a reasonable doubt we're talking about. This is what's called a preponderance of the evidence, which means just tip the scale a little bit, just show that it's more likely than not. And after what was 8 years by that point, they couldn't do that. And yet the government appealed, and in the Court of Appeals, I don't know if you can hear that siren.
Yeah, I was wondering what that was.
Yeah, sorry, this is New York. Court of Appeals, they remanded the case and said that the district court had to do some more fact finding. The law had slightly changed, but they didn't have to appeal. This was the Justice Department under President Obama, who said he wanted people to get out of Guantanamo. And yes, yet they appealed almost every case that was won. And at that time, about 70% of them were getting won. So a lot of people are still there, people who were there for a long time. And we blame President Obama for the 7 additional years.
Yeah.
I'll put it right at his feet.
Yeah, and it's counterintuitive for a lot of people that see him in a different light and see his Department of Justice in a different light. And obviously, September 11th and the World Trade Center bombing, and I know you're in New York right now, brings out a lot of emotions, as well it should and always will. But, in the midst of that, there were a lot of things that happened, including, basically taking Mohamedou al-Slahi and taking him away from his family for all those years and torturing him. That, is a really important sideline to that tragedy that we're all united about. And I know you speak out a lot about things that changed after September 11th. And, what's sort of the biggest takeaways from that time period for you? And what have we learned from it? What haven't we learned?
Well, 3,000 people died, and that was a real tragedy. How many died in COVID? Over 1 million? How many Afghans died? as a result of this war that President Bush started after 9/11. How many? Hundreds of thousands. And how many American soldiers died? So a lot of people died as a result of the US reaction to 9/11. And to me, that's one of the biggest things. We wouldn't have Guantanamo had it not been for President Bush. We probably wouldn't have ISIS. We wouldn't have had 2 wars that we got into. So a lot of tragedy happened that I believe was not necessary after 9/11. But in terms of the law, there are still 31 men in Guantanamo, including my client, Ibrahim al-Nasri, who never was charged with anything to do with 9/11. But I believe the whole criminal legal system has suffered as a result of it. There's a pullback on due process. And by the way, it's not clear that due process even applies in Guantanamo. People think that this is under the military code of justice. It is not. This is a whole made up court. It's not clear that any part of the US Constitution applies in Guantanamo.
And certainly your position is that it does and should, though, right?
Of course it should. If we're prosecuting people, the Constitution should apply. But this is a made up court. They literally made it up out of thin air.
Fascinating. One of the other cases you had, and I'd be interested to know firsts in terms of your encounters with her or any other important firsts along the way, is your representation of a very controversial figure, Chelsea Manning. What can you tell us about that?
I first met Chelsea when her case was on appeal, when she wrote and asked me to represent her. She was at that time in jail, and I went with my co-counsel, Vince Ward, who had been a Navy lawyer and knew much more. Her case was in the military court, and she was in a military confinement. So that's when we met. We worked on her case, we worked on her appeal, and the case was sitting in the appellate court for the Army when she thought that it would be a good idea to petition for clemency. And I remember having the conversation with her, and my feeling at the time, without going into that conversation, my feeling at the time was that it was a good thing to do, even if we had virtually no chance, because she had a lot of supporters. Appeal cases are hard to maintain any enthusiasm for. And then all of a sudden, he granted it, President Obama granted it, and it was to take place in 120 days. Well, 120 days later was going to be when Trump was president. So we were worried up until the final moment that she got out. I went to get her out of the prison in Kansas. We had security. We were wearing flak jackets because Kansas is an open carry state and there are people who don't like Chelsea. And we went in right after midnight and the press were all lined up at the entrance we went into. What they didn't realize is that we were going out a separate entrance. There is a film, a documentary called XY Chelsea. It's on Showtime, which has some of that footage. But we got on a plane, we went out right on the tarmac. We had a police escort and flew to a safe house where we stayed for 4 days until she got an apartment in New York. It was an incredible experience.
You know, some of the people that you represent, and certainly Chelsea's one of them, have done things that people disagree with, and in some cases just really, really heinous things. So some of the people you've represented, obviously a lot of our listeners are not lawyers. So, I mean, I know it's a cliche question, probably one you're asked all the time, but I think it's a good one for people to hear. How do you get comfortable representing people that have done or accused of really, really bad things?
My job is to protect the Constitution for all of us. Everyone has the right in this country to have a lawyer stand with them, to have someone on their side against what is really the awesome power of our entire government. It's one of the few times that the government is attacking, our own government is attacking someone. And that someone has a right under the Constitution to have a lawyer. And the Constitution requires due process, that there be the rule of law, that the Constitution be upheld, that the trial be fair. And that's my job. I'm not the judge, not the jury. It's not up to me to decide whether someone is guilty or innocent. And frankly, I don't care. I may care because I'm worried more for an innocent client in the sense that it's much more difficult. But I don't care. If the government tries the case fairly, they're entitled to a conviction if the person is guilty. And then we'll argue over sentencing. But, you know, most people, the crimes they commit are the worst 5 minutes of their lives. I think we can all say also that we might not commit a crime, but we can't ever say that we won't be accused of committing a crime. And we all have to know that the Constitution is there behind us so that our legal system is a just system for everyone. And I think that's the job of a criminal defense lawyer.
Yeah, and one you've done for a long, long time. Liv always likes to ask the Hollywood questions. I know you're chomping at the bit to ask questions about Jodie Foster. And I will say, by the way, and maybe I told you this, Nancy, that the very first movie I ever saw in a theater was Paper Moon with Jodie Foster and Walter Matthau. So I've been a big fan of hers forever.
I do have a question, but you might not have an answer to it. So have you ever had someone that everyone might know, like a Scott Peterson or like an Alex Murdaugh, contact you during their case to be your attorney, and then you ended up saying no, and then you saw the verdict, and then you ever thought back like, oh, maybe I should have done that? Or like, have you ever had any huge time people contact you in the middle of a case to ask you to hop on it?
Yes, but I'm not going to say who they were.
Oh, I know. I'm guessing it's not an infrequent thing. And when you do what Nancy does.
Fairly, it's not a frequent thing, but I do have people contact me and say, you know, I don't trust my lawyer, and I'll tell them, well, you've got to work with your lawyer, or you can have your lawyer contact me. I can't go in to see you. I don't represent you. I don't want you to come to my office unless you've notified your counsel. There are times when people don't want to notify their counsel, and I understand that. But I usually don't want to get in the middle of those cases.
Yeah. Well, is there ever a time that you would take one of those cases if you saw that the current attorney wasn't doing what you would do?
I have taken them when someone has come to me and said, I don't want this lawyer anymore, and described what was going on. Mm-hmm. And I've then called the lawyer and said, your client wants to discharge you and wants me to represent him. So are you willing to withdraw, and I'll take the case? I've had that happen.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. All right, so I'll ask the Hollywood questions. You grew up watching Jodie Foster too. How surreal is that to watch somebody dressing like you and talking like you and saying your words?
It is surreal. The first time I met her, I said, this makes me very nervous. I've been in documentaries. I've sort of played myself, but I've never had anyone play me. And she said, well, we're even. I've never played a real person, except for Anna and the King, and Anna had been dead for 250 years. So we both laughed about our insecurities about it. It was strange, but I became comfortable with it as I became more comfortable with her.
So did they actually film in Guantanamo Bay, or was it like a hub? No, they couldn't visit there at all.
There's no way they could have done that. They couldn't even visit Guantanamo. The press can go on very limited excursions there. Most of it was filmed in Cape Town, South Africa. And Mohamedou and I did go there, and it amazed me what good job they did with building the sets. But South Africa has mountains where they were able to shoot the Afghanistan areas. It has a beach where they were able to shoot the Guantanamo parts. The only part that wasn't shot in South Africa was the Mauritanian part, and that was shot in Mauritania. And actually in Mohamedou's family compound.
Once he saw the set, did it make him feel like sad or any like PTSD, or was he like, okay, I can close this chapter of my life? Like, what was his emotions when he first saw that?
He and I watched some scenes, and the one that was the most difficult for us to watch was the scene where Jodie sits down and he says, "Who are we suing today, Nancy?" And she says, "No one." And he says, "Why are you here?" And she says, "I'm just here to be with you, so you won't be alone." And in fact, that happened over and over and over for 7 years. And he and I watched that, and we were sitting together in front of the monitor, and we held hands, and we were both crying. And then he said, "Okay, I've seen enough." And we went out and saw. We went to Robben Island, and we also went to see the penguins, and we did some sightseeing rather than watch any more of it.
There's a lot for our listeners that are interested to find on YouTube and on the internet. Hamidou's obviously doing a lot with his life, and I'm so impressed with his penchant for forgiveness. There's actually a YouTube video where he invited and the person accepted. This was one of his guards came and spent time with him, someone that he met in Guantanamo Bay, and they got to spend time and get to know each other outside of it. What's your biggest takeaway in knowing him? Where does he get that penchant for kindness and forgiveness?
I don't know where it comes from. I know that he feels like after he was controlled for all those years, he wanted something he could control, and nobody could take that away from him. The guard who visited him, Steve Wood, was the first. There's a documentary made about them called My Brother's Keeper, and you can see it on YouTube. It's just 20 minutes. Steve is a lovely guy, just a very gentle, good person, and he and Mohamedou had a good relationship in Guantanamo, and he's visited him a number of times. Steve and I are godparents to Mohamedou's son. So, but he's also interviewed some of the guards and interrogators who still think he's a bad person. And he met with them to do another documentary that was done by a German reporter. But he's doing great now. He's living in Europe. He's a writer in residence. He's writing. He's written a second book called The Actual True Story of Ahmed and Zarga. It's a wonderful, delightful little novel about a Bedouin who loses his camel. And he's doing well.
That's great. Well, listeners, if you haven't seen it, The Mauritanian is a great movie. It's available where is it streaming? I should know.
Well, it's been on Amazon Prime, but starting
Right.
in April, it will also be on Netflix.
Terrific. I highly recommend it. It's a great movie and it's a great story. And appreciate you joining us, Nancy. Thanks so much.
Thank you. It's great fun.
My first rodeo. My first rodeo. My first rodeo.
What'd you think?
That was so good. I have so many more questions for her. I really wanted, like, I guess I'll have to watch the movie again and read the book because I wanted more details about Guantanamo Bay.
Yeah.
Because I'm such a prison junkie.
Oh, that's true. Yeah. Well, the movie does a good job of it. It condenses a lot of different meetings and trials into sort of one little arc that our little media pea-brains can absorb.
Yeah.
But yeah, here's the book, by the way, for anyone who's watching the video of our podcast. It's called Guantanamo Diary. This is the restored edition because the very first edition had a whole bunch of things that were not yet declassified. But there's a lot out there in open source, and she does. She takes on some really hard cases, and you see what makes her go is just protecting the Constitution for everyone,
Yeah.
even if that means she has to take on some really unpopular cases.
Uh-huh. I feel like people that also practice criminal law, whether you're a prosecutor or defense attorney, you're a special like type of person because a lot of other people just can't stomach what they have to go through and the exhibits they look at. And
Right.
I mean, I couldn't because I worked at the juvenile division for one summer and I just got so hung up on everything. I'd come home at
Right.
night and just constant thinking. So it's always cool to talk to someone on the criminal side just because I feel
Mhm.
like their brain works differently than my brain. But yeah, she was awesome.
Yeah, I mean that stuff's traumatizing for sure. I think, and she's been doing it. I won't age her, but for
Yeah.
more than a couple decades.
Yeah.
And some criminal defense lawyers become kind of crusty and just jaundiced, and she's not that way at all. I've spent a fair amount of time with her socially, and she her son and daughter-in-law and her grandkids used to live next door to me. So I met her as just the
Oh.
grandmotherly lady, and then later realized just
Yeah.
how impressive and cool she was
Yeah.
substantively. And she's just a really nice, regular person who's just fierce in court.
Oh yeah, definitely so fierce.
Yeah,
to do what
I
she
hope that
does.
our listeners, everybody has strong um, feelings about the people she represents
Yeah.
and the cases she gets involved in and the issues and so forth. But I hope this is an opportunity for people to get to know those issues a little more deeply and maybe be more informed in how they feel. Maybe it doesn't change their feelings at all, but it's just one of those opportunities to empathize and learn from Nancy's first rodeos.
Yeah. Cool.
So
Let's lock up this episode.
oh, you want to make a prison joke? That seems a little
That's the only prison.
little on the nose.
Yeah, let's shut it down.
All right, we'll lock it up. We'll shut it down, and we'll get back together next time on My First Rodeo.